The autumn air in New York's Greenwood Cemetery was imbued with a crisp chill, stirring the golden-brown leaves that lay scattered along the stone pathways. Alexander Carter emerged from his polished black Cadillac, deftly adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. He was a figure of affluence and influence, the head of a multi-billion-dollar tech empire, yet as he strolled through the cemetery, surrounded by ancient gravestones, he sensed none of the dominance that characterized his life in the business realm. Today marked the 5th anniversary of his wife Evelyn's passing, and each year he undertook this solitary journey to pay tribute to the woman he cherished above all else. There were no board meetings, no mergers, no deadlines, only silence and the persistent weight of grief that lingered endlessly. As he neared her resting place, the sound of his polished shoes crunching on the gravel caught his attention, revealing something out of the ordinary. A young boy perched beside Evelyn's headstone, his small arms encircling his knees. He appeared to be no older than 6 or 7, clad in a worn, thin jacket that did little to shield him from the chill. His brown hair was tousled, and his face, pale and innocent, carried an expression of profound sorrow. Alexander's brows knitted together in a frown. Strangers seldom ventured close to his wife's grave. He had insured it. Who was this boy, and what made him seem so at home in that place? With a deliberate clearing of his throat, Alexander began to speak, his voice imbued with both curiosity and a commanding presence. "Hello there, young one. Do you find yourself wandering aimlessly?" The boy gazed upward, his big, tear-laden eyes meeting Alexander's with a depth that caused him to hesitate. Those eyes held an unsettling familiarity, stirring an eerie discomfort that slithered up his spine. The young lad gently shook his head, a slow and deliberate motion. "No," he murmured. "I visited my mom." For a fleeting instant, Alexander questioned whether he had truly heard correctly. His heart raced within his ribcage, and a chilling, unsettling feeling took root in his chest. "What are you?" he inquired, his voice wavering. The young lad paused, his finger hovering uncertainly over the name etched into the cold marble of the headstone. Evelyn Carter. The world appeared to shift on its axis. Alexander's breath caught in his throat, his thoughts swirling in a frantic effort to comprehend the shocking revelation he had just encountered. To his knowledge, his wife had never experienced pregnancy. They had discussed the idea of starting a family, but circumstances had intervened. The extended hours of toil, the mounting pressure, the unspoken sacrifices they had both endured. Before they could realize their dreams, she was gone, swept away in a tragic accident that left Alexander utterly broken. Yet here stood a young one asserting they were her offspring. His hands tightened into fists, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. He knelt beside the boy, his typically steady demeanor beginning to fray at the seams. "Could you repeat that?" His voice was softer this time, tinged with a hint of apprehension about the response. The young lad sniffled, using his sleeve to wipe his nose. "She was my mother," he reiterated. "She would come to see me, prior to her departure." A shiver coursed through Alexander's spine. His thoughts roared with disbelief at the sheer impossibility of it all. If Evelyn had a child prior to their meeting, wouldn't she have mentioned it to him? And if she had brought this boy into the world after their union, why had she remained silent all this time? He observed the child with greater attention. The likeness was unmistakable, the gentle brown eyes, the refined features that echoed Evelyn's. It felt like he was gazing upon a fragment of her essence that had lingered in this realm, concealed from his view until this very moment. With a difficult swallow, he compelled himself to maintain his composure. "What's your name, kid?" he inquired. "Liam," the young lad replied in a gentle tone. The name held no significance for Alexander. His thoughts swirled with a tempest of feelings, shock, confusion, and an all-consuming sense of betrayal. If the child spoke honestly, it indicated that Evelyn had concealed a life-changing secret from him. But what is the reason? And in what way? She was the sole individual he had ever entrusted with his true self, the only one capable of glimpsing the man hidden beneath the sleek facade of wealth and success. She must have had a compelling reason to conceal something like this. Alexander let out a sharp breath, his fingers running through his dark hair. "Where is your residence, Liam?" The young lad paused once more, his fingertips gliding along the surface of Evelyn's gravestone. "At the shelter," he ultimately confessed. "Within the vibrant streets of Brooklyn. They look after me there." Alexander sensed a constriction in his chest. A young one, the offspring of Evelyn, residing in a temporary home? The mere idea twisted his stomach in knots. What could have led to this situation? What kept him away from his family? Where could his father be? A sudden thought struck him with the force of a freight train. "Who informed you that Evelyn was your mother?" Liam looked up, his face a canvas of purity and sorrow. "Miss Joan is at the shelter. She mentioned that my mother abandoned me there when I was an infant. She cared for me deeply but found it impossible to hold on. She would come by occasionally, but then she ceased her visits. Miss Joan claimed she visited heaven." His soft voice quivered on the final word, and Alexander sensed a fracture within him. Evelyn had been spending time with this boy. He had devoted years to mourning her absence, convinced he had uncovered every detail of her life. And yet, there existed a whole chapter of her life that he had never even imagined. A hidden offspring, left behind at a refuge. What is the reason? What could have been so dreadful, so unthinkable, that she felt compelled to hide it from him? His thoughts surged with inquiries, yet immediate solutions eluded him. Just the chill of the wind, the fragrance of fall, and the young boy perched next to his wife's resting place. His son, if Liam's words held any truth. Alexander pressed his fingers against his temples, a strange wave of helplessness enveloping him. This was beyond his reach, impervious to wealth or influence. This was not a transaction he could haggle over or an emergency he could pass off to his team. This held deep significance. This was Evelyn. Amidst the chaos, there was a little boy, blissfully unaware of the profound impact he had just made on Alexander's life. After years of certainty, Alexander found himself at a loss, unsure of his next steps. Yet, one thing remained clear: he couldn't simply turn his back and leave. Alexander remained motionless, his breath creating delicate wisps of mist in the frigid New York atmosphere. The young boy standing by his wife's grave, this child named Liam, had just broken apart all the beliefs he held about Evelyn. His intellect battled against the notion, yet the feelings within him whispered an entirely different narrative. He had constructed his existence on reason, planning, and meticulous choices, yet here he stood, gazing into the tear-filled eyes of a child who strikingly resembled the woman he had cherished. Every part of him ached to reject it, to turn away and assure himself that this was merely an error, yet he found himself unable to do so. There was something in Liam's expression, in the way he grasped the gravestone as if it were his final link to a mother he scarcely remembered, that held Alexander firmly in the present. He took a deep breath and compelled himself to utter the words. "Who else is aware of this?" he inquired, his voice now softer and more deliberate. Liam gazed downward, his foot nudging the scattered leaves by the headstone. He softly sighed, longing for Joan. "She revealed it to me when I had reached an age of comprehension. She mentioned that my mother cared for me deeply but was unable to provide the care I needed. She would occasionally visit, but then she ceased to do so." The young lad paused, gathering his courage before raising his gaze once more. "Did she cease her actions due to your influence?" The question struck Alexander with the force of a gut punch. He recoiled a bit, taken aback by the unfiltered purity in Liam's tone. His heart raced as the weight of the implications dawned on him. Had Evelyn concealed this child from him due to her own remorse? Did she worry about how he would respond? He had never shown cruelty, yet he possessed a deep understanding of his own nature. He was a person who cherished order, who anticipated transparency, who struggled to navigate unforeseen turmoil. Had she feared that revealing the truth would shatter their bond? He lowered himself, aligning his eyes with Liam's. "I had no idea about you," he remarked, his tone tinged with both regret and disbelief. Had I possessed that, the outcome would have been altered. Yet, as he uttered those words, a doubt crept in, leaving him to question their validity. Would he have embraced this? Could he have embraced another man's child and nurtured him as if he were his own? His fingers clenched tightly, a fire of frustration igniting within him. He sought clarity. Genuine responses. There was but a singular point to begin. With a determined posture, he retrieved his phone and navigated through his contacts until he located the number for his private investigator, Daniel Reeves. "I need you to investigate something for me," he stated as soon as the call was established. "A young boy named Liam residing in a shelter in Brooklyn. Investigate thoroughly to uncover all details regarding his journey, identify his biological father, and determine if there are any documents linking him to Evelyn." He terminated the call just as Daniel was about to pose any inquiries. At that moment, he lacked the tolerance for any sort of elaboration. He glanced back at Liam, who observed him with a mix of caution and intrigue. "Join me," Alexander said, extending his hand. The young lad paused, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "Where is it?" "A place bathed in warmth. It's unwise to be out here in this frigid weather." Liam cast a final look at the headstone before intertwining his small hand with Alexander's. A seemingly small act, yet it unleashed a torrent of feelings within him. He guided the boy to his car, secured him in the passenger seat, and began the drive toward Brooklyn, his thoughts swirling with a mix of emotions. The streets of New York rushed past, their vibrant hustle muted by the gravity of the occasion. Upon arriving at the shelter, a humble brick structure nestled between two imposing apartment buildings, Alexander parked the car and exited. Liam trailed behind, his hands buried deep in his jacket pockets as they stepped inside. The scent of disinfectant mingled with the mustiness of old books, while a weary woman in her 60s tended to the front desk. She repositioned her glasses, her gaze falling upon Liam. "Back so soon, darling," she remarked gently, but then her eyes moved to Alexander, her demeanor shifting to one of caution. "Who might you be?" "Alexander Carter," he said, retrieving his wallet and sliding a business card across the counter. "I would like to have a conversation with Miss Joan." The woman paused briefly, then nodded and slipped away down the hallway. Moments later, a small, silver-haired woman appeared. She glanced at Liam first, offering him a gentle smile, then shifted her gaze to Alexander, her keen blue eyes examining him intently. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice a mystery. "I had been curious about when you would arrive." Her words reverberated within him, creating yet another tremor of emotion. "Did you really know who I was?" he inquired, his tone laced with doubt. Miss Joan nodded, her hands neatly folded before her. "Evelyn shared some insights about you," she confessed. "She extracted a vow from me, insisting I never make contact, never reveal anything to you. Her desire was to safeguard you both." "Shield me from what exactly?" he insisted, his tolerance dwindling. "From the reality." The elderly woman let out a weary sigh. Through the anguish, she found clarity. "Evelyn held deep feelings for you, Mr. Carter, yet she was haunted by a past that she could never truly leave behind. Upon meeting you, she had already faced the most challenging choice of her life, letting go of Liam so he could pursue a brighter future. She longed to share her thoughts, but by the time she found the strength, she had vanished." Alexander sensed a knot forming in his stomach. He had devoted years to mourning Evelyn's absence, convinced that he understood her more deeply than anyone else. And yet, a fragment of her existence had stayed concealed from him. He glanced at Liam, who was fixated on the ground, his slight frame curled inward as though preparing for disappointment. His heart tightened at the sight. He found himself caught in a whirlwind of emotions, torn between frustration directed at Evelyn for her secrecy and a deep sadness for the boy who had lived without the burden of knowledge for so long. With a steadying inhale, he turned to confront Miss Joan once more. "What is his fate now?" She regarded him with a careful gaze. Ultimately, it rests in your hands, Mr. Carter. He is without family. No legal guardians are present. He has been here since his infancy. Leaving without action leads to no transformation. He lingers here, anticipating a place to call his own that might never materialize. Ultimately, the choice to be involved in his life rests in your hands. Alexander sensed the gravity of the choice pressing down on him. He entered the cemetery today, anticipating a moment to lay down flowers and mourn quietly. Instead, he had stepped away with a child who could potentially be his burden. A child bound to the woman he cherished above all else. He cast his gaze upon Liam, who remained averted, avoiding eye contact. Gently, with great care, he extended his hand and rested it on the boy's tiny shoulder. "Come on, kid," he murmured softly. "It's time to leave this place." Liam finally lifted his gaze, his eyes filled with astonishment, followed by a flicker of cautious optimism. Silently, he trailed behind Alexander as they exited through the door. The billionaire CEO had dedicated years to constructing an empire, meticulously managing every facet of his existence with exactitude. As he exited the shelter with Liam beside him, he felt a sense of unfamiliarity wash over him, recognizing that after years of certainty, he was finally venturing into the unknown. Before we proceed, kindly subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. As Alexander navigated the vibrant streets of New York, the burden of the night's discoveries weighed heavily on his mind. The vibrant glow of the city and its unending activity seemed almost dreamlike, as though he had stepped into a reality that wasn't his own. He cast a fleeting look at Liam, who remained still in the passenger seat, his small hands clutching the edges of his oversized jacket. The young lad gazed through the window, his expression a blend of weariness and doubt. Alexander found himself at a loss for words in front of him. How could he possibly offer solace to a child he had only just encountered, particularly when that child's mere presence turned his entire understanding upside down? He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, exhaling slowly as he steeled himself to concentrate on the next steps that lay ahead. As he glided into the subterranean garage of his Upper East Side penthouse, he silenced the engine and faced Liam. "Come on," he urged, his tone gentler than normal. The boy paused briefly, then nodded and stepped into the private elevator behind him. As the doors shut, an oppressive silence enveloped them, thickening the air around them. Alexander had always found solace in silence, navigating negotiations, business meetings, and boardrooms brimming with high-stakes decisions, yet this situation felt distinctly different. This transcended the realm of stocks or mergers. This tale revolves around a young boy who experienced profound loss before he could truly grasp the essence of family. As they entered the penthouse, Liam's gaze expanded, absorbing the lofty ceilings, the expansive windows framing a stunning vista of Manhattan, and the elegant, understated furnishings that adorned the spacious area. It was crafted for an individual who embraced efficiency, not for a young one. In a moment of clarity, Alexander understood just how distant and unfeeling it might appear to Liam. The absence of toys, the lack of warmth, and the clear indication that no family had ever called this place home were strikingly evident. As it has never occurred. With a deliberate clearing of his throat, Alexander placed his keys upon the polished marble counter. "Are you feeling hungry?" Liam paused for a moment, then gave a slight nod. "Indeed, just a bit." Alexander found himself uncertain about the dietary preferences of children. Was there anything in his fridge that wasn't either pricey wine or ready-made gourmet dishes? He opened the fridge, his eyes gliding over the meticulously arranged shelves before choosing something uncomplicated. He suggested grilled cheese. Liam's expression lit up ever so slightly. "Understood." It was a seemingly insignificant detail, yet the subtle warmth in the boy's voice caused a shift within Alexander's chest. He may not excel in this area, but he certainly had the ability to craft a sandwich. While he toiled in the kitchen, the enticing sizzle of butter in the pan permeated the air. Liam meandered into the living room, his tiny hands gliding over the smooth edges of the bookshelves. He paused before a framed photograph on the mantel, capturing a moment of Evelyn. His fingers lingered just above the glass, hesitant to make contact. She was truly beautiful, he whispered. Alexander gulped nervously. He approached, taking his place next to Liam as they gazed at the photograph of the woman they had both mourned. Indeed, he murmured softly. She existed. The boy then turned to him, searching his face. Did you truly care for her? The inquiry struck Alexander unexpectedly. It was a seemingly straightforward word, yet it held immense significance. He had poured all his love into Evelyn, yet now he understood there were countless facets of her that remained a mystery to him. Did that imply his love had been lacking? He let out a slow breath. Indeed, he confessed. Many. Liam nodded, a subtle acknowledgement flickering within him, as if that answer resonated with a profound part of his being. He whispered that Miss Jones said she loved him too. Yet, she was unable to hold on to me. His voice trembled just a bit, and Alexander sensed a constriction in his throat. This boy had spent his entire life pondering the reasons behind his mother's absence. Now, as he stood in an unfamiliar house, doubt crept in. Was he on the verge of being abandoned once more? Alexander had always lacked a nurturing disposition. He constructed barriers around his being, favoring reason and order above the chaos of feelings. But gazing at Liam now, he realized one undeniable truth: he couldn't turn his back. Uncertain of what lay ahead, he resolved not to allow this boy to confront it by himself. After dinner, Liam nestled into the expansive leather couch, his petite figure almost engulfed by the soft cushions. Alexander reclined in the armchair opposite him, savoring a glass of scotch, absorbed in contemplation. He had already directed Daniel to delve further into Evelyn's history, to uncover all there was to know about Liam's father, whether he was still living, and if he represented any sort of danger. Yet, a fragment of his mind was already aware of the discoveries the investigator would unveil. Liam found himself utterly alone. Only him. That understanding weighed down on him profoundly. As time went on, Liam's blinks became more languid, his head dipping forward gently before he startled himself back to consciousness. Alexander observed him, weighing the decision of directing him to one of the guest rooms or allowing him to rest in his current spot. Just as he was about to make a choice, Liam's voice shattered the stillness. Will you be sending me back? The inquiry was so hushed, so laden with doubt, that Alexander experienced it as a blade to his core. He placed his glass on the table and leaned in, propping his elbows on his knees. Would you like to return? Liam swiftly shook his head. Negative. I have no other place to go. Alexander ran a hand through his hair, letting out a slow breath. He was unprepared for this moment. He lacked the tools to be a protector, much less a parent. Yet this child had endured more than enough loss. Then you stay, he declared with conviction. Liam's eyes grew wide, revealing his surprise at the unexpected response. Is that so? Alexander gave a slight nod. Indeed. We'll find a solution. Liam remained silent, yet the subtle easing of his small shoulders and the gradual release of his hold on the blanket conveyed all that Alexander required to understand the situation. Moments later, Liam drifted into a deep slumber, his breath gentle and rhythmic. Alexander reclined, gazing out at the sprawling city skyline beyond the window. His existence had consistently been carefully orchestrated, each step deliberate. In just one night, everything transformed. He entered the cemetery with the intention of mourning alone, yet emerged with a child who could potentially change the trajectory of his existence. He found himself uncertain about what would unfold next. For the first time in years, he experienced a sensation beyond mere emptiness. Alexander stirred awake, the subtle rustle of activity echoing through his penthouse. For a moment, he reclined in bed, gazing at the ceiling, attempting to reconstruct the happenings of the night before. Suddenly, the truth dawned on him: Liam was present. He had company now. He tossed aside the covers and rubbed his face, attempting to dispel the weariness that clung to him. His life had always been filled with chaos, yet this particular clamor, the intrusion of another soul into his realm, was a wholly unfamiliar experience. Upon entering the living room, he discovered Liam positioned near the expansive glass windows, gazing intently at the city skyline. The boy remained cocooned in a blanket from the previous night, his petite figure appearing even more diminutive against the imposing skyline and the dawn painted with gentle shades of orange and pink. Liam pivoted at the sound of Alexander's footsteps, his gaze betraying a hint of doubt. He spoke softly, unsure whether to disturb your slumber. Alexander gestured with a flick of his wrist, brushing aside the matter. You're doing well. He cast a quick look at the morning hours. It was far too early for someone like him, who had long since forsaken the dawn in favor of late-night discussions and even later hours consumed by his tasks. Yet, there was an unmistakable quality to this morning that set it apart. There was no pressing engagement to attend to, no urgent messages clamoring for his focus. A young boy in his penthouse, appearing uncertain of his place in such a grand setting. Are you feeling hungry? Alexander inquired as he made his way to the kitchen. Liam paused for a moment, then gave a slight nod. Indeed. Alexander didn't consider himself a culinary expert, yet he believed that breakfast ought to be straightforward. He discovered a few eggs nestled in the fridge and cracked them into a pan, the sizzle breaking the quiet that enveloped them. Have you ever attended school? He inquired, maintaining a relaxed tone. Liam fidgeted in his seat at the counter, toying with the edge of the blanket. A small amount. Miss Joan attempted to guide my education at home, yet she was overwhelmed with the number of children she had to tend to. Alexander acknowledged with a slight nod, his expression revealing no surprise. The foster system was under immense strain, leaving children like Liam to slip through the gaps unnoticed. He was uncertain about the decision to enroll Liam in a school at this point. His existence was far from ordinary, and he felt utterly lost when it came to providing the boy with that sense of security. Yet he was certain of one thing, the kid deserved a genuine opportunity for something greater. While they dined, Liam maintained a quiet demeanor, though he wasn't completely disengaged. He observed Alexander intently, as though he were still piecing together the enigma that was him. Alexander felt uncertain about what the boy perceived when their eyes met. An unfamiliar face? A beacon of hope? Is there a temporary presence? The notion of holding a lasting place in someone's life stirred a sense of unease within him. He had always struggled with relationships, with commitment, with anything that demanded emotional openness. As he observed Liam maneuvering his scrambled eggs across the plate, he realized he had already forged a quiet promise, one from which he could not retreat. The remainder of the morning slipped away in a haze. Alexander reached out to Daniel, directing him to compile all available information regarding Liam's history. His birth certificate, any medical records, anything that could shed light on what had transpired with this child before he arrived at Evelyn's grave. The greater his knowledge, the more equipped he would become. Yet, the inquiry that remained unanswered was what he planned to do with that knowledge. Was he considering adopting Liam? Take on the role of his legal guardian? Or was he merely holding him here until he devised a more effective plan? He lacked the answers, and for a person who had constructed his existence on the certainty of always knowing the next step, that was deeply disconcerting. By noon, he had reached yet another conclusion. Liam was in search of fresh attire. The ill-fitting jacket he donned since leaving the cemetery was unmistakably not his own, and every aspect of his appearance shouted of disregard. Alexander felt uncertain about shopping for a child, yet he was aware of someone with the expertise to help. Following a brief phone conversation, he settled into the back seat of his car, Liam next to him, as they headed towards Fifth Avenue, where his assistant, Rebecca, awaited their arrival. She was adept, incisive, and the sole individual capable of managing Alexander's erratic requests seamlessly. After years of working for him, she couldn't help but feel a sense of astonishment as she watched him emerge from the car, a child accompanying him. "You didn't mention you had a child," she remarked, arching an eyebrow. Alexander cast her a glance. "I do not." Liam lingered nearby, evidently uncertain about Rebecca's presence. Her expression softened as she gazed at him, her body lowering slightly in a gentle crouch. "Hello, I'm Rebecca. Could you please tell me your name?" Liam paused momentarily before responding, "Liam." She beamed with delight. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Liam. How about we find you some stylish outfits, shall we?" The shopping excursion unfolded more seamlessly than Alexander had anticipated, largely due to Rebecca's decisive leadership. She possessed a keen sense of detail and had a remarkable ability to put Liam at ease. He observed as Liam gradually began to unwind, selecting things he appreciated, even breaking into a smile once or twice. It was peculiar witnessing the boy awaken in a manner that had been absent the previous night. Once they finished, Liam found himself with a fresh wardrobe, while Alexander began to sense an unsettling shift towards what seemed like responsibility. That evening, after the meal, Liam settled onto the couch, perusing a book that Rebecca had gifted him, his feet tucked comfortably beneath him. Alexander perched on the opposite side, a glass of whiskey cradled in his hand, observing the city lights dance beyond the window. "Have you ever felt fear?" Liam inquired abruptly, his gaze fixed on the pages of his book. The inquiry took Alexander by surprise. He was a man who had endured fierce boardroom conflicts, economic downturns, and profound personal tragedies. He never voiced his fear, keeping it hidden beneath the surface. At times, he confessed after a lengthy silence. Liam gave a slight nod, conveying an air of comprehension. "Same here." Alexander found himself puzzled by the impact of that admission on him. Perhaps it was understandable that Liam felt a sense of fear. He had lost his mother, had no father, and was now residing with an unfamiliar person in a world that felt utterly foreign to him. And yet he found himself here, adjusting, enduring. In that quiet resilience, there was a certain quality that resonated with Alexander, catching him off guard. As the night deepened, Liam's eyelids began to flutter, his head gradually sinking against the soft embrace of the couch cushion. Alexander observed him for a brief moment before rising and retrieving the blanket from the far end of the couch, gently covering the boy with it. He was uncertain about what lay ahead, yet he was certain of one thing. Liam remained firmly in place. Before we proceed, kindly subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Alexander had always held the conviction that life thrived when it adhered to a well-defined blueprint. He constructed his realm through unwavering discipline, meticulous control, and strategic risks. However, his present circumstances did not align with any of those ideals. A week had gone by since he discovered Liam at Evelyn's grave, and each day had brought its own set of challenges. The boy had grown more subdued, as if he were beginning to acclimate to his new circumstances, yet a lingering doubt remained about their permanence. Alexander was also wrestling with the transformations. His penthouse, previously a sanctuary of quiet and productivity, now bore subtle yet unmistakable traces of a child's influence. A solitary plate at breakfast, novels scattered across the coffee table, and the soft murmur of a television broadcasting cartoons in the early hours. He found himself in a haze of uncertainty regarding his feelings about the entire situation. That morning, Alexander found himself in his office at Manhattan Towers, gazing at the financial report spread out before him, yet his thoughts drifted far beyond the confines of his desk. Daniel had compiled additional information regarding Liam's history, and the file now lay before him, poised to be explored. He inhaled deeply before turning the pages with a deliberate motion. The initial item that caught his eye was the birth certificate of Liam. His mother's name, Evelyn Carter, appeared on the list. The name of the father, however, remained unfilled. Alexander had anticipated this outcome, yet witnessing it laid out in stark contrast stirred a deeper unease within him than he had foreseen. He flipped the page, perusing the case reports from child services. Liam moved through various foster homes following Evelyn's passing. The documents highlighted issues of neglect, unstable surroundings, and the boy's repeated attempts to escape. His most recent placement was with a woman named Joan Mitchell, who operated a crowded foster home in Brooklyn. Yet, the file held no answers regarding Liam's presence at Evelyn's grave that night. No reference was made to any legal guardian accompanying him, nor was there any sign that anyone had been searching for him. Alexander shut the file with a deliberate motion and released a slow breath. As he delved deeper into Liam's history, it became increasingly evident that this boy had endured solitude for an extended period. The idea disturbed him. He had never viewed himself as the nurturing sort, never envisioned bearing the weight of another's existence. Yet with Liam's presence, Alexander found it increasingly difficult to dismiss the mounting sense of obligation that was eating away at him. That evening, Alexander returned home sooner than he typically did. Liam was discovered in the living room, seated on the floor, surrounded by his new books. The scene was nearly dreamlike. He had encountered children in fleeting moments before, at charity events, within the circles of business associates, but never in this way, never as an integral part of his own reality. "How did your day unfold?" Alexander inquired, loosening his tie as he entered the room. Liam glanced upward, a look of unexpected astonishment crossing his face at the inquiry. "Good," he replied with a hint of uncertainty. Alexander acknowledged with a nod and settled onto the couch. "What book has captured your attention lately?" Liam paused thoughtfully before lifting one of the books. It was a compilation of timeless tales, a selection that Rebecca had chosen for him. "Are you fond of them?" Alexander inquired. Liam gave a nonchalant shrug. "I suppose. Some evoke a sense of melancholy." Alexander reclined, contemplating that thought. He had always been captivated by narratives, not for their storylines but for the insights they offered into human nature. Each narrative carried a moral, an unspoken reality concealed within its phrases. He expressed that tales of sorrow hold significant value. They impart knowledge that might remain undiscovered otherwise. Liam nodded, his expression contemplative. "Did you ever come across poignant tales during your childhood?" The inquiry took Alexander by surprise. He had read, of course, but nothing compared to what Liam was immersed in. From an early age, his formative years were influenced by the glossy pages of business magazines and the intricate details of financial reports, even before he truly understood their significance. He conceded that it wasn't the case. Liam refrained from pressing further. He placed the book down and reached for another, casually turning the pages as his mind wandered. For a moment, silence enveloped them both. The stillness felt soothing, nearly instinctive. Alexander observed the boy closely, taking note of how he had begun to appear more vibrant with the consistency of regular meals and adequate rest. He retained the wary demeanor of someone unaccustomed to placing trust, yet there were instances, such as this one, when he appeared to lower his defenses just slightly. "Today, I came across some details regarding your history," Alexander finally remarked. Liam's body tightened, his fingers clenching the edges of the book. "Ah!" Alexander paused, contemplating his next words. "Your mother did not include a father on your birth certificate." He observed Liam's response intently. The young lad gulped, yet remained silent. Alexander paused, allowing him the space to reflect. At last, Liam spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "She never mentioned him." Alexander nodded, anticipating that response. "Have you ever considered searching for him?" Liam swiftly shook his head. "Absolutely not. If he truly desired my presence, wouldn't he have shown up by now?" The straightforwardness of the statement struck Alexander more profoundly than he had anticipated. He felt at a loss for words, so he just gave a nod. Liam's reasoning was profoundly moving in its sincerity. Later that night, after Liam had settled into sleep, Alexander lingered by the window, gazing out at the sprawling city beneath him. His thoughts were in constant turmoil. He had dedicated his whole existence to making choices rooted in reason and gain, carefully balancing risks with potential benefits. Yet, this was not merely a transaction. This was a whole different experience. He could simply leave and find a more suitable place for Liam, allowing someone else to take on the responsibility. Yet the idea of parting with Liam lingered uncomfortably, leaving a sour sensation behind. The sudden buzz of his phone jolted him from his reverie. It was Daniel. Without any introduction, Daniel stated, "I discovered something else." A record lay sealed within one of the older databases. Evelyn Carter submitted a request for paternity testing when Liam was just a baby. The inquiry was left unaddressed, yet the name she provided as the possible father remains noted. Daniel paused, uncertainty flickering in his mind. It was Mark Donovan. Alexander stood still. The name struck a familiar chord within him. Mark Donovan was a name that echoed in boardrooms and adorned the pages of business headlines. A billionaire investor, relentless in his pursuits, a figure recognized for his merciless tactics and his capacity to dismantle enterprises in the blink of an eye. Alexander had collaborated with him in the past, even viewing him as a competitor in certain circles. The notion that Liam might actually be his son was nearly inconceivable. Yet, if it were indeed true. "Do you really think so?" Alexander inquired. "Absolutely," Daniel responded. "The documentation is available." Evelyn likely had her suspicions, yet she never had the opportunity to validate them through legal means. Alexander exhaled deeply, his thoughts swirling in a whirlwind. If Mark Donovan was Liam's father, it altered the entire landscape. Alexander was certain that if Donovan discovered the truth, he would not react kindly. The man wielded his power with an iron grip, his control as formidable as his strength. If he desired Liam, he would claim him, regardless of Liam's feelings on the matter. Alexander's hold on his phone grew firmer. After years of navigating the intricate power dynamics of the business realm, he found himself in a situation that felt entirely unique. This transcended mere financial transactions or agreements. This story revolves around a young one who had endured far too many losses. And Alexander was determined not to allow someone like Mark Donovan to disrupt the fragile stability that Liam had only just begun to establish. Before moving on to the next, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share with your friends. Alexander hardly found rest that night. The discovery that Mark Donovan could potentially be Liam's father had sent his thoughts whirling in unexpected directions. He had encountered merciless entrepreneurs in the past, individuals who would stop at nothing to achieve their desires. However, this was not merely a transaction, it was the essence of a child's existence. He was determined not to allow Mark Donovan to come in and seize control simply because he had the authority to do so. By morning, Alexander had reached a conclusion. He had to verify the reality, but even more crucially, he had to determine his course of action if Mark truly was Liam's father. He couldn't afford to let the boy be swept away into yet another tempest of doubt. During breakfast, Liam remained silent at the table, idly prodding his eggs with his fork. He seemed more distant since their talk the previous night, his familiar, cautious demeanor returning. Alexander observed him, a peculiar sense of protectiveness swelling within him. He inquired about your thoughts on a visit to the park today. Liam looked up, a frown forming on his face. Is it the park? Alexander gave a slight nod. Central Park. I thought you might enjoy stepping out for a bit. Liam paused momentarily, then offered a slight shrug. All right, I suppose. It wasn't excitement, but it was certainly something. They reached Central Park later that morning, the autumn air invigorating yet pleasantly mild. The park buzzed with energy as joggers weaved through the paths, families gathered for picnics, and street musicians filled the atmosphere with their enchanting melodies. Liam strolled alongside Alexander, his hands buried deep in his jacket pockets, his gaze flitting about as if he were still uncertain of his place in this moment. Alexander recognized that expression, one he had encountered previously in colleagues who seemed ill at ease in his realm. Yet with Liam, it felt distinct. It wasn't merely uncertainty, it was a profound conviction that he was perpetually on the brink of being abandoned once more. Eventually, they discovered a bench by a pond, where Liam settled in, observing a cluster of children as they tossed crumbs to the ducks. Alexander settled next to him, feeling uncertain about how to initiate the important conversation that loomed ahead. "Did you mention that your mother never spoke of your father? How did that start?" Liam stiffened but gave a nod. What if she embarked on a quest to seek him out? Liam glanced at him, his eyes filled with caution. "Could you clarify what you mean?" Alexander selected his words with precision. What if she questioned his identity and sought to verify it? Liam furrowed his brow, contemplating the notion. "I'm not sure," he confessed. She remained silent. She simply put in a great deal of effort. She refrained from discussing matters of that nature. He averted his gaze, his voice barely above a whisper. It seemed she harbored a fear of something. Alexander sensed a well-known discomfort take root in his chest. If Evelyn had felt fear, it was not without justification. Had Mark Donovan been the father, that apprehension could have been deemed warranted. "If you had the opportunity to know for certain, would you want to?" he inquired. Liam paused for a moment, then offered a slight shrug. "I'm uncertain. It seems it holds little significance." "He isn't here, is he?" Alexander let out a slow breath. The boy had faced abandonment in countless forms, leading him to abandon hope itself. The moment struck with a heavy weight of sorrow. "What if he was aware of your existence?" Alexander inquired with caution. "What would happen if he discovered it now?" Liam tensed up. He responded swiftly, expressing his reluctance. "I couldn't care less if he's a wealthy individual or anything like that. He was absent when my mom required support, so what reason do I have to seek him out now?" The certainty in Liam's voice was piercing, and Alexander sensed a weight settle in his chest. The boy was weary of yet another strong figure viewing him as a mere duty. He sought a sense of permanence. He sought a presence that would remain steadfast. In that moment, Alexander understood with a profound intensity that he could not bear to relinquish Liam to anyone, not even if Mark Donovan was revealed to be his biological father. He couldn't pinpoint the moment it occurred, but the thought of releasing Liam stirred a sense of unease within him that he had never experienced before. That evening, Alexander sat down with Daniel in his office, the gravity of his choice bearing down on him. "We require a paternity test," Alexander stated bluntly. Daniel, always the consummate professional, merely nodded. He assured me that he could handle it with the utmost discretion. However, if Donovan catches wind of it, he will start searching. Alexander tightened his jaw. "We ensure that he remains unaware, at least for the time being." Daniel observed him intently for a brief moment. "It seems you've made your choice, haven't you?" he inquired. "Regardless of his role as a father, you won't let go of Liam." Alexander let out a deep breath, his hand moving to his face in a weary gesture. "The child has endured more than his fair share," he confessed. "I refuse to allow a billionaire with a god complex to waltz in and take him as if he were just another business deal." Daniel wore a sly grin. "That's quite a bold position, especially coming from someone with immense wealth and a sense of superiority." Alexander cast a glance his way, yet Daniel merely laughed. "Very well. I will complete the test with discretion. However, if Donovan is indeed the father, we must devise a strategy. He lacks integrity in his approach." Alexander was already aware of that. He had witnessed firsthand the tactics employed by Mark Donovan, acquiring companies and cornering individuals until they were left with no option but to capitulate. However, Liam was not an organization. He was just a young one. And Alexander was determined not to allow him to be used as a mere piece in another strategy. 2 days later, Daniel presented him with an envelope filled with the test results. With steady hands, Alexander opened it, his heart racing more than he cared to acknowledge. He perused the document swiftly, and upon arriving at the conclusion, he let out a sharp breath. Mark Donovan was, in truth, the biological father of Liam. Alexander reclined in his chair, allowing the truth to wash over him. He had anticipated it, yet witnessing the confirmation rendered it undeniably tangible. The pressing question remained, how would he utilize this information? He had vowed to himself that he wouldn't allow Liam to be thrown into uncertainty once more. However, concealing this from Mark Donovan would prove to be quite a challenge. The man possessed resources, and should he ever discover the truth, he would assert his rights with determination. For the moment, Alexander resolved to keep his thoughts to himself. He would shield Liam for as long as possible, ensuring his safety from the impending storm that was bound to arrive. Yet, beneath the surface, he was acutely aware that it was merely a question of when Mark Donovan would uncover the reality. And when that moment arrived, Alexander would need to prepare for a confrontation unlike any he had faced previously. Before we proceed, kindly subscribe to our channel, like our content, and share it with your friends. Alexander was acutely aware that he was treading a precarious path. Maintaining the confidentiality of the paternity test results was a gamble, yet he felt compelled to prevent Mark Donovan from seizing control of Liam's future. The boy had faced more than his fair share of turmoil, and Alexander was determined not to allow another formidable figure to regard him as merely a possession to be seized. Yet, the burden of reality bore down on him each day, and he understood it was merely a question of when something would compel him to act. Liam had started to find his footing in his new life, yet he maintained a sense of vigilance. He found the concept of permanence unfamiliar, and Alexander grasped the reason behind it. The boy had faced abandonment in countless forms, and trust was a fragile concept for him, not easily earned or given. Yet, there were instances, brief and ephemeral, when Alexander caught sight of the boy Liam might have become had fate been more benevolent towards him. As they wandered into a bookstore in Midtown, Liam's eyes sparkled with excitement at the towering shelves brimming with tales waiting to be discovered. Or when they strolled along the Hudson River, and Liam, for the first time, posed a question to Alexander about his childhood. These moments revealed to Alexander that, against all odds, Liam still harbored a flicker of hope hidden deep within him. One evening, Alexander came home to discover Liam at the dining table, engrossed in an open book before him. The boy was not engaged in reading, however. He gazed at the pages, seemingly adrift in contemplation. "Is there something you're pondering?" Alexander inquired as he placed his briefcase on the ground. Liam paused for a moment, then gave a slow nod. He confessed softly that he had been reflecting on his mother. Alexander drew out a chair and settled in across from him. "What about her story?" Liam delicately ran his finger along the spine of the book. "She put in a great deal of effort. I never quite grasped the reason behind her constant fatigue, but now it all makes sense. She was doing her best to ensure our well-being. Yet, I believe she felt a sense of sadness as well." Alexander experienced a surge of compassion. Evelyn had given it her all, yet she had shouldered weights that no one ought to endure in solitude. "She had deep feelings for you," Alexander remarked. "It is evident." Liam nodded, his gaze fixed elsewhere. "Do you believe she was aware of my father's identity?" The inquiry caused Alexander to hesitate. Liam had never been so straightforward before. With great deliberation, he selected his words. He mentioned that he believed she had her doubts. Yet perhaps she had doubts about whether he would be the father you truly deserved. Liam lifted his gaze, his eyes glinting with clarity. "So he's the villain?" Alexander let out a breath. "Not exactly. However, he possesses great strength. At times, influential individuals may not choose wisely regarding their family matters." Liam observed him intently for a brief moment. "Are you familiar with his identity?" Alexander felt a constriction in his chest. This was the moment he had feared the most. Liam, you do, Liam interjected, his voice scarcely rising above a whisper. You were aware, yet you chose not to share that with me. Alexander leaned forward, his tone steady yet composed. I aimed to keep you safe. I had to confirm everything before I spoke up. Liam's hands tightened into fists. Who is that individual? Alexander paused, fully aware that deception was not an option. Mark Donovan. Initially, the name held no significance for Liam. He furrowed his brow, attempting to recall it. Then understanding struck, and his expression turned grim. The tycoon? The one that's always on television. Alexander gave a slight nod. Liam's face contorted with fury and incredulity. He was aware of my existence and remained indifferent. Alexander gave a slight shake of his head. He remains unaware for now. He was never informed by your mother, and I only discovered it not long ago. Liam rose so suddenly that his chair dragged across the floor with a sharp sound. What comes next? Will you share that with him? The fury in his voice wasn't solely aimed at Mark Donovan, it also encompassed Alexander. And that stung deeper than he was willing to acknowledge. Only if you desire it, Alexander replied calmly. This is your journey, Liam. Your voice matters in determining the next steps. Liam strode back and forth in the room, his feelings clashing inside him. What if he discovers it regardless? What if he attempts to whisk me away? His voice wavered just a bit, revealing the underlying fear masked by his fury. Alexander rose and gently rested a firm hand on the boy's shoulder. I won't allow that to occur, he stated. You won't be taken anywhere unless you choose to go yourself. Liam scrutinized his face, searching for any hint of dishonesty. Discovering nothing, he let out a shaky breath and gave a nod. That night, as Alexander reclined in his bed, he sensed a shift in the air. The reality had been unveiled, and retreat was no longer an option. Liam possessed a father, a formidable figure indeed. Eventually, Mark Donovan would come to know the truth. When the day arrived, Alexander would be prepared. He had assured Liam that he would not allow anyone to take him away. He was determined to uphold that promise, regardless of the challenges ahead. Before moving on to the next segment, kindly subscribe to our channel and share it with your friends. Alexander sensed that the tranquility was fleeting. As Liam uncovered the truth of his father's identity, an unspoken timer started ticking away. Mark Donovan was not the kind of man to linger in shadows, and Alexander understood all too well that the billionaire would inevitably reveal the truth. The inquiry was, when he acted, what would be his response? Liam chose to stay silent about it for the time being. He found it difficult to come to terms with the reality that his father held such significant influence in New York. Yet, Alexander observed the nuanced shifts in the boy's behavior. He seemed increasingly restless, his eyes wandering during their discussions, as though his thoughts were perpetually whirling with unresolved inquiries. And then one evening, those questions erupted at last. A gentle rap echoed through Alexander's office door, marking the beginning of an unexpected encounter. He glanced away from the mountain of reports he had been poring over and noticed Liam lingering nearby, his hands tucked into the pockets of his hoodie. May I inquire about something? The boy asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Alexander set his pen aside. Absolutely. What thoughts are swirling in your head? Liam entered the room, hesitating at the threshold as though he were uncertain about voicing the thoughts swirling in his head. With a deep breath, he inquired, do you believe he would have wanted me? The inquiry struck Alexander with more intensity than he had anticipated. He had anticipated this, naturally. Yet, the realization that Liam had been harboring this thought within him still struck a chord of sadness deep within. Liam, Alexander spoke softly, there are moments when individuals fail to recognize the value of what they possess until it slips away. Your mother decided to distance you from him. That doesn't imply you weren't desired, it simply indicates she was attempting to shield you. Liam emitted a laugh devoid of humor. Did she really believe he posed a threat? Not perilous, Alexander clarified. However, he is an individual who values power more than connections with others. Your mother understood that you were worthy of so much more. Liam nodded slowly, yet a shadow of concern lingered in his expression. So if he discovers this, will he desire me now? Alexander let out a weary sigh, his fingers pressing against his temples. I am not familiar with Liam. However, I am certain of one thing, you are far more than merely a business asset. You are not a mere piece in another's game. You are an individual, and only you have the authority to determine your value. The boy contemplated those words thoughtfully before finally responding, I don't know if I even want to meet him. Alexander gave a gentle, comforting smile. In that case, there's no need for you to do so. Your decision is yours to make. However, the following day, everything transformed. In the midst of a meeting, Alexander's assistant burst in, her face drained of color, conveying a sense of pressing urgency. Sir, she gasped. A visitor has arrived to see you. He emphasizes its significance. Alexander's brow furrowed, an instinctive awareness of impending trouble washing over him. Who might that be? Mark Donovan. The name coursed through Alexander, sending a chill deep into his core. He willed himself to stay calm as he stood there. Where could he be? Within the lobby. Alexander straightened his suit and descended the stairs, bracing himself for the impending tempest. As he entered the lobby, he immediately noticed Mark Donovan. The billionaire exuded an air of authority. His tailored suit crisp, his stance radiating authority and confidence. His piercing blue gaze fixed on Alexander's the instant he drew near. Hello, Alexander, Mark said with a polished tone. It's time for a conversation. With a sweeping motion, Alexander indicated the conference room, guiding the billionaire through the door. As soon as the door clicked closed, Mark sprang into action. I trust you understand the purpose of my visit. Alexander held his gaze steady. I can infer. Mark crossed his arms. I prefer to be informed and not left unaware. Particularly regarding a matter of such importance. What do you find to be truly meaningful? Alexander inquired with caution. Mark's expression grew stern. A young one. My little one. Silence hung heavily in the air, charged with unspoken emotions. Alexander had anticipated this confrontation, but now that it was unfolding, he recognized the depth of his disdain for the notion of Mark Donovan laying any sort of claim to Liam. What is it that you want, Mark? He finally inquired. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Mark inclined his body forward just a touch. I wish to see my son. Alexander's jaw clenched. He's not merely a prize to be won now that you're aware of his existence. Mark's eyes sparkled with annoyance. I didn't claim that he was. However, you also don't have the authority to decide this for him. Alexander took a deep breath, striving to maintain his composure. He's uncertain about the idea of meeting you. I assured him that he would have a say in this matter, and I am determined to uphold that assurance. Mark observed him intently for a prolonged moment before giving a subtle nod. All right. I will not impose anything. However, I wish to convey a message to him. Alexander paused for a moment before giving in. I will hand it over to him. However, there should be no pressure or manipulation involved. If he doesn't want to reach out, give him space. Mark wore a sly grin. Time will tell. As the evening unfolded, Alexander found himself seated at the dinner table with Liam, a palpable tension hanging in the air, foreshadowing the gravity of the moment ahead. He retrieved the sealed envelope and placed it on the table with a deliberate motion. It originates from Mark. Liam gazed at it with the intensity of someone confronting a ticking bomb. What does it indicate? I'm not sure, Alexander confessed. I mentioned that I would leave it up to you to decide whether he wanted to read it. Liam lingered in uncertainty, his hand hovering over the envelope for what felt like an eternity. With great care, he opened it, his gaze sweeping over the words penned within the letter. Alexander observed the change in Liam's expression, moving from uncertainty to confusion, and then to something more profound. Something incomprehensible. At last, Liam placed the letter aside and raised his gaze. He desires to meet with me. His voice held a mysterious quality, yet his hands betrayed a subtle tremor. Alexander maintained a steady tone. Are you interested in meeting him? Liam gulped nervously. I'm not sure, he confessed. However, I believe it's necessary for me to do so. Alexander nodded, a weight of discomfort settling in his chest. This moment had been anticipated by him all along. He simply hadn't anticipated it arriving this quickly. Liam occupied the back seat of Alexander's car, his gaze fixed on the New York City skyline as they drew closer to the restaurant where he was about to meet his father for the very first time. His hands were tightly bound in his lap, thoughts swirling in a tempest of inquiries he wasn't certain he wished to resolve. What if Mark Donovan was not the person he envisioned? What if he was unfeeling, detached, or even more troubling? What if he desired nothing more than to wipe Liam from his existence? The tension in his chest intensified as the car decelerated in front of a posh restaurant in Manhattan. Alexander rested a comforting hand on his shoulder. He gently reminded him that this was not a necessity. Liam took a deep breath and nodded slowly. I understand. However, it is necessary for me to do so. He emerged from the vehicle, his heart racing as he approached the doorway. The maitre d' promptly escorted him to a secluded area of the restaurant, where, at a table by the window, sat Mark Donovan. The man exuded the same commanding presence as depicted in the newspapers, clad in a sharp suit, his hair impeccably styled, radiating an air of authority that ensured he was the focal point in any gathering. As Liam drew closer, he observed something surprising. Mark's gaze was neither dismissive nor analytical. His expression was truly remarkable. Ambiguity. Perhaps even a sense of unease. Liam, Mark said, rising as the boy approached the table. I'm pleased you arrived. Liam nodded as he took a seat across from him. In that fleeting instant, silence enveloped the space. Mark exhaled, leaning forward just a bit. I don't expect you to have faith in me, he confessed. I don't anticipate that you would have any fondness for me. However, it's important for you to understand that I was unaware of your existence. If I had, his voice faded, leaving an air of uncertainty hanging in the silence. Liam observed him intently, weighing the truth of his words. Why did my mother keep me from you? He finally inquired. Mark's jaw clenched. He confessed that her lack of trust in him was the issue. And I can't hold that against her. In my youth, I was driven, with my sights set on constructing a legacy above all else. Yet, had she confided in me, had I been aware, he shook his head. I might have approached things in another way. Liam found himself at a loss for words in that moment. One part of him yearned to trust his words. Another part questioned whether it held any significance at all now. What is it that you seek from me? He inquired at last. Mark's eyes grew tender. Silence. I simply wish to understand you better. The dialogue unfolded, deliberate and careful as they exchanged thoughts on trivial matters, Liam's education, his passions, and his experiences with Alexander. Mark absorbed every word, occasionally posing questions but always maintaining a gentle approach. For the first time, Liam understood that this man, his father, shared the same uncertainty about this meeting as he did. As the evening unfolded, Mark paused, his hand lingering in his pocket before he finally retrieved an envelope. I don't want to overwhelm you, he said, gently pushing it across the table. However, I wish to present this to you. Liam picked it up, casting a curious glance in his direction. What is it exactly? Mark mentioned it was a letter. I penned it the evening I discovered your existence. It captures all my thoughts perfectly, even the ones I struggled to express. Liam paused for a moment before sliding the envelope into his pocket. He found himself uncertain about when, or if, he would ever delve into it. Yet, at this moment, it seemed sufficient to acknowledge its existence. Once they completed their meal, Mark cleared his throat. "I'm aware that the past is unchangeable," he remarked. "Should you ever wish to converse or become a part of my journey, I'm here. The door stands ajar." Liam regarded him for an extended pause before eventually giving a nod of agreement. Understood. It was not a commitment. It lacked any sense of obligation. Yet, it marked the beginning. As Liam emerged into the open air, he found Alexander leaning against the car, patiently awaiting his arrival. He examined the boy's face with great attention. "How did it turn out?" Liam let out a breath, casting a glance back at the restaurant before turning his gaze to Alexander. "Surpassed my expectations." Alexander smiled, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Nothing else holds significance." As they drove home, Liam retrieved the envelope from his pocket, his fingers tracing the edges thoughtfully. He hasn't opened it yet. For the first time in his life, he sensed that perhaps, just perhaps, he wasn't truly alone in this world after all.